In the time of ancient Egyptians, representative art was used throughout an array of sculpture, architecture, and texts within Egyptian society. With this representative art historians see a theme of configuring humans into many different Egyptian deities. At first glance, many Western art historians had trouble interpreting the meanings of these configurations, leaving much of the discovered art up to interpretation. But as time has passed, we have found more details into Egyptian culture, which has led us to further understand the meanings behind the hybrid divinities. To start off, the Egyptian universe is filled with an array of humans, animals, and plants, all that can be shown as an expression of the divine. In this universe, the gods that the citizens of Egypt prayed to embodied all of these different living forms. When looking at art representations of these deities, Egyptians believed that the body could be broken down into two parts, the head and the body, both representing a different characteristic of that deity. The head represented the identity or quality of the deity, while the body represented what activities the deity may have participated in. Much of ancient Egyptian art is broken up into two periods, the predynastic and the dynastic periods. In the predynastic period, we see a theme of Egyptian pharaohs surrounding themselves with many different animals or other beings to show off their power. We see this being represented in the Narmer palettes, where the king is surrounded by lions and birds of prey in order to show off his victory in unifying North and South Egypt. In the predynastic depictions of Egyptian deities, art historians found that there was a physical embodiment of these deities within animal forms. We see this with the example of deity Seth, or god of chaos, confusion, and mummification. Here this deity is portrayed having an animal head with a human's body. The problem with this example is that, to this day, no one has been able to identify what type of animal is being represented, so that what this leaves us is our interpretations. Egyptian society was molded with metaphors, and in order to understand the meanings of the culture and the representations shown in their art, it was a you had to be there kind of thing. From an outsider's perspective, it could be reasonable to suggest that Egyptians praised animals as their god specifically. In direct contrast, it has been discovered that because of these animal hybrid divinities, Egyptians praised anthropomorphized or animal-like beings. In later representations of these hybrid divinities, we see many different themes that we saw in the pre-dynastic period. Also, in the dynastic period, we saw this idea of fear of females being portrayed in the hybrid divinities. Egyptians would use aggressive animal forms to represent things such as pregnancy, childbirth, or other sexual things.
The early Egyptians created 2- and 3-dimensional images of things that they considered to be superhuman forms. These images then had rituals performed on them to become mediators and then worshipped as the divinities. Some early images of gods have remained intact in graves and temples, although it was hard to tell if it was just an image or if it was sacred. The quality of the material and the context was helpful in making this distinction. Early representation of the gods were displayed on high staffs with extra garnishing like feathers and ribbons, and were typically seen during rituals with the king. Later on, they represented a province based on the divinity and the images created, which marked the image's superior status. Hieroglyphs were first seen being used universally in 3 ways to say God: a staff, a falcon, and a mummified man. They were the generic terms for the word and suggest that the earliest Egyptian divinities were inanimate objects. It wasn't until later that animal representations of the divinities became prominent in Egypt. At this time, it was thought that the certain animals were frequently used for their divine gifts. Those animals being that birds can fly, gazelles can outrun human hunters, and bulls have large, prominent genitals, which represented the gods' superhuman abilities. These animals were worshipped for what they represented and not for their form, typically. It was clear that the animals were sculpted of nicer material were the ones to worship, and the smaller, lesser quality sculptures were used as personal offerings to the gods. When the hybridization of humans and other objects began, the flow was not very clean. It looked like a face on an animal, or vice versa. And an example of this would be the goddess Bat. She was originally designed to be shaped as a rattle for the gods with limbs, and then she was mutilated to have her limbs into cow horns and had a cow's face attached.
Another example of the Egyptian hybrid divinities is the Sphinx. The academic article that I read, The Sphinx, Who Built It and Why, by Zahi Hawass and Leonard Mark, talks about the Sphinx's significance to both Egyptians in the ancient times and the people who live in the current world, its location and its meanings. Located in the Giza necropolis, the area dominated by the pyramids of the three pharaohs of the 4th dynasty, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, the Great Sphinx of Giza has been more than a national symbol of Egypt, ancient and modern. Rather, it is an archetype of antiquity whose image has stirred the imagination of poets, scholars, adventurers, and tourists for centuries. According to writer John Anthony West and geologist Robert Scotch, the Sphinx is the remnant of an advanced civilization that is otherwise lost to archaeology. From before, Egypt scholars' assumptions on the meaning of the Sphinx have been varied. Herbert Riquet, a German Egyptologist, claimed that the Sphinx is a depiction of the sun god by telling the evidence that the arrangement of the Sphinx temple was similar to the sun's circuit and embodied the divisions of time. On the other hand, other scholars have argued that the Sphinx represented the king, the incarnation of the god Horus, in a posture of giving offerings to the sun Ra. Although Riquet and other scholars have different opinions, their arguments have one thing in common, that the association with the sun god might relate to a general Egyptian term for Sphinx, living image of Atum, the creator of the world in the pyramid texts. English Egyptologist Alan Gardiner has noted that the question of whether the generic Egyptian Sphinx represent the king as a powerful lion, a god as a powerful lion, a king in the leonine form of a god, or a powerful god revealed in the person of the king, is one that the Egyptians might have answered all of the above, and the creation of the Sphinx must have had something to do with the increased emphasis on the sun in royal ideology.
The religion of ancient Egypt was a polytheistic religion that lasted approximately 3,000 years. Although there was no word for religion in ancient Egypt, the treatments of Egyptian religion have made it very easy to determine their subject. According to Osman, there are two concepts of Egyptian religion that can be distinguished. First being Ma'at, which designates the idea of a meaningful, all-pervasive order that embraces the of humankind, objects, and nature. The present condition of the world does not correspond to this definition. Therefore, it manifests itself in the phenomenon of Isfet, which stands for a lack of religion in the world, which causes sickness, falsehood, injustice, violence, etc. The Egyptians worshipped a pantheon of gods, all of whom possessed powers that influence nature and human society. Many aspects of nature, such as the falcon, were associated with multiple deities. The pantheon ranged from very spiritualist gods that took on a vital role in the universe to smaller deities with very localized functions. It is important to note that the depictions of gods were not meant to be literal, as the gods' true natures were left to the imagination. The imagery of the gods were to symbolize their role in nature. I will use a few examples to explain this. The sky god Horus is often depicted as a man with a falcon head. Also, the falcon head can be interpreted as Horus watching over Egypt from the skies to protect it. Anubis was often depicted as a jackal-headed man, an animal whose preying habits threatened the mummification process. Anubis was often depicted as a jackal-headed man, an animal whose preying habits threatened the mummification process. Anubis's black skin represented the discoloration of corpses after the mummification process and the soil, which Egyptians believed to be a symbol for resurrection. According to Hornung, the goddess Hathor's usual iconography shows a thin woman who wears a wig with a pair of cow horns and a sun disk in between them. However, in the Hathor shrines of Deir el-Bahri, she is depicted as a cow with a human face and animal ears taking the deceased in protection. Unlike other human-animal divinities, she is less commonly shown as a human with an animal's head.